Hello, and welcome to today's Talk Shop, SWET's continuing series of talks from the trenches about what it is that we do. That is, we who are wordsmiths who work in English with content about Japan. In the spotlight today is Karen Hill Anton in conversation with Suzanne Kamata. Suzanne will introduce Karen, but first I'll introduce Suzanne. She's a prolific and prize-winning author and a longtime resident of Tokushima, although today she's joining us from South Carolina. Suzanne has written extensively for and about young people, and like Karen, she writes about raising multicultural children. In much of her work, she brings to life the experience of being and living in an adopted culture. I'm really looking forward to their conversation today, so without further ado, let's welcome Suzanne. Over to you.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us. I think a lot of you are familiar with Karen and her writing, but I'll just share a bit with you from her website mostly. So Karen Hill Anton is a writer, columnist, consultant, and coach. For more than 15 years, Karen wrote the popular column Crossing Cultures for the Japan Times, and many of the columns were later published in book form. The book was also called Crossing Cultures. She also wrote a column called Another Look for Chunichi Shimbun, and a monthly opinion essay for Shukan ST, a publication for Japanese students who are learning English. Beginning in 2000, Karen consulted for global corporations in Japan, managing employee development programs. Her clients included Citibank, Eli Lilly, Pfizer, JP Morgan, JP, and many other prestigious companies. She has coached senior executives in the finance, pharmaceuticals, and software industries. Her areas of expertise are cross-cultural competence, assertive communication, work-life balance, networking and social skills, maternity leave, and life coaching. Karen was also invited to serve on the Internationalization and Society Advisory Council of Prime Ministers Keizo Obuchi and Ryutaro Hashimoto. And she's also on various boards, such as the Board of Governors and board at Temple University, Japan, the Shizuoka Human Rights Association. She has studied Japanese calligraphy for 25 years and attained second-degree mastery. And she also is an avid knitter, and with 4 children and 9 grandchildren, she has many projects. And she's a devoted student of hula. Her eldest daughter was born in Denmark, and her 3 other children were born in Japan. Originally from New York City, she's lived with her husband, William Anton, in Tanyu, Shizuoka Prefecture since 1975. In addition to the memoir, which we will discuss tonight, and the book I mentioned, she has contributed to the various anthologies, such as The Meaning of Michelle, published by St. Martin's Press, which is a collection of essays celebrating Michelle Obama. And she has published fiction in The Broken Bridge, fiction from expatriates in literary Japan, which I edited. So like many of you, I first became aware of Karen through her column for the Japan Times. And I remember going to the library and standing there and reading about her experiences in this mountain town in Shizuoka. And when I came up with the, as it turned out, somewhat unoriginal idea of putting together a collection of short fiction by expatriates in Japan, I thought she might be doing some other writing and that she might have some fiction that she could share with me. So I wrote her a letter in care of the Japan Times. So this was way before the internet and email. And she did indeed have a draft of a novel, which she sent to me. And I included an excerpt called Summertime in this book. So if you have it, you might want to go back and read it. I read it again today, and it was very, very apt because it was very hot. And I hadn't read it really since I had children, so I could appreciate it so much more. So this novel was, I believe, semi-autobiographical. And when I was reading the view from Breast Pocket Mountain, I kind of remembered some of the scenes, like Denmark and the dojo and whatnot. So my first question for you, having originally written a semi-autobiographical novel, what made you decide to tell your story in memoir form rather than fiction?
Okay, good place to start. I abandoned the idea of writing that novel. I still have it, and in fact, you were mentioning that my story for your collection was from the novel. I had totally forgotten that. Because even I was thinking, oh, Summertime, right? Did I write a short story? Because that's not something I would normally do, but it was from that novel. But I was getting nowhere getting it published, and I literally put it in a drawer and totally forgot about it. But I did know I wanted to write a memoir, and so when I started to do that, I completely really, about doing the novel, which was a first novel, and it was autobiographical in content, but it was not my autobiography. Not even by a long shot. I mean, it had many made up characters and scenes and situations that never happened, with all my imagination. But when I decided I was going to do the memoir, I thought, yeah, I'm going to tell my whole story, the real story.
Okay, and so you live away from the big city like me, and writing is kind of a lonely occupation. But have you formed any sort of writing community in Shizuoka? And like, where did you go to get feedback on your writing?
Absolutely no community of writers, no one, none whatsoever. But you mean feedback for the memoir?
Yeah, or whatever you're writing, you know.
No, in general, when I was doing the column, I never got feedback. I mean, if I were to get it, I would have come straight from my editor at the Japan Times. But no one ever saw a column before I submitted it to the paper. But for my writing in general, yeah, I don't get feedback. For the memoir, of course, I had beta read. The memoir was read in workshop in writers conference in Southern California. I had well, do you want to know more about
Yeah, as
the
much as you
process?
want to talk.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, well, and I hired a book project consultant. Someone is a friend, but also a New York Times best-selling writer and memoirist. I went to the conference. Where the book was read in workshop, and also critiqued by editors. And at the conference, it won the conference award for most outstanding nonfiction, that was certainly encouragement for me to continue. I said, okay, I guess I've got more than a manuscript here, or I have something that I can finish. And after that, I hired a developmental editor, a copy editor, a proofreader, a book formatter, and a book cover designer. And the book
How
cover
did?
design, by the way, is the art director of Random House.
Oh, wow. Okay. It is a very nice professional cover.
Yeah.
It looks very nice. So what was your criteria for choosing an editor? Like, were you looking for someone who knew about Japan, or didn't that really matter? Or
Yeah. Actually, when I think about it now, it might have been good to choose someone who knew something about Japan, but I didn't. I really wanted someone who sort of, I would say, got me and got where I was coming from, and who wouldn't put me in any boxes or expect, because of their expectations, that this is what I should be writing about, or how I should write. And that's for the developmental editor. And I couldn't say so much that I vetted editors, but one I turned down, and I'm so glad I did. And she'd come to me, highly recommended. But when we talked and yeah, exchanged some emails, I just kind of felt she didn't really get who I was, and I mean it sounds I don't know too flaky, but where I was coming from, or I don't know how to say it. But the editor I did decide on, I she had absolutely no Japan background, but I thought she had a really good sensibility, that she aligned with me, and that she was going to do her best for me to help me tell my story in the best way that I could.
Okay. And I'd like to ask you a little bit more about the writing. Like it's very detailed, like the things that you brought along with you as you traveled through Afghanistan, and there are many very vivid details. Did you keep a journal, or how did you remember all these things?
I have to say at the outset that do have a good memory, and I relied on it a lot. But I do not keep journal or diaries. And just about a month ago, I dug out some things I call the third drawer, where I keep writing that I've kind of abandoned. And I saw that I had written some things, but I didn't refer to any of those things when I wrote the memoir. I just, yeah, really, I would say just, dug deep. But also, I had started writing it more than 10 years ago. And again, I abandoned it because a publisher who had been interested, then they decided that they weren't interested. And it was just, what can I say? I just said, oh, forget it, and just put it in the drawer. But for example, the part about traveling from Europe to, well, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, and Thailand, I wrote that years ago. A lot of those details I had put down, not thinking I was going to do anything with it in particular. Just, yeah, I wanted, I guess, to have some record of it. And I was glad I did once I did the memoir. But also, by the way, it was one of the parts I thought about cutting when I did the memoir. It was, for me, it was like, oh, who wants to know this stuff? Oh, they drove to Afghanistan. Oh, yeah, whatever, or something. Because it's not like, I stayed in any place long, or I was, delving into the cultures or anything. We were literally, traveling, well, across half the world, and, having various experiences, but not really living in those places, I would say. So I did think of cutting it, because I thought it actually might be boring for people. But apparently it wasn't. A lot of people tell me, they love it and they find it so exciting, and hearing about, visiting Tehran or Kabul, it was like all those years ago, they find interesting.
Yeah, it was definitely not boring. It was fascinating. There are so few people who have visited those places, let alone written about them. So that was very interesting. So in addition to writing about your adventures, you've experienced some trauma in your life, and living in Japan for such a long time, you kind of think that, well, there's a bit of taboo, like connected to writing about, say, mental illness, or murdered family members, that kind of thing. So I'm sure that was very difficult to write about. But I'm wondering if there was anything that your immediate family objected to, or anything that you wound up cutting because someone didn't want you to write about it. Or, I mean, you don't have to tell me what it was, but I wonder if there was anything like
Well,
that.
first of all, my immediate family is my husband and my children.
Right.
I don't have any other family. And they were all able to read the manuscript before it was published. And if they had objected to anything at all, I would have taken it out. It wouldn't, nothing could be so important to me about the book that I would hurt or even offend my family members in print. But there was nothing any of them objected to.
Right. Okay. So you worked for several years as a cultural consultant, and you had some training as a cultural consultant. So I'm wondering, like, how does your work or your previous training as a cultural consultant impact your writing, or how might it have impacted your writing?
Oh, not at all. Not at all. When I was consulting, you mean like consulting for Citibank and Deutsche
Well, I'm just thinking
Bank.
about how these days, like, there's a lot of concern about, the identity politics and, cultural appropriation and what kind of words to use and what words to
Right, right,
italicize
right.
and what words to hyphenate. And
Right.
and
Well,
you
one,
said you
right.
said you didn't like the term diversity. So if you could talk about
Well,
that.
what I said, I was like, I wouldn't use the term diversity now, though I was doing diversity training, and in the year 2000, I started, in 2001, but it's because it's come to mean about race. And when I
Mhm.
started working with Citibank, with Eli Lilly, with Deutsche Bank, with Shinsei Bank, with Pfizer, with Baxter, all of these companies wanted diversity training, but a lot of it was centered around harassment prevention, and especially sexual harassment prevention and also power harassment prevention. And I think people forget that diversity simply means difference, and difference can be gender, nationality, age. It can be educational background. It can be perspective. It can be work style, many different things. And these are the things we were dealing with when I was doing that kind of training and consulting. And there was no need to mention. Well, first, I don't even refer to race. I don't accept it as a concept. But to think that we needed to point out, yeah, skin color as something particular, when the issues we were really dealing with, most especially in the beginning, was the place of women in the workplace, or the position of women in the workplace. That there was so much discrimination, prejudice, unacceptance of diversity in terms of having women who were totally capable, educated, etc., but assuming that they should only be in supportive roles as opposed to being in roles of leadership or management. And that was one of the things we really worked to change.
Okay. Well, that segues well into another question I have. Okay, so many women find it difficult to give themselves permission to write, especially creatively. Rebecca Ottawa, who many of us know, for example, who started writing after the age of 55, she told the Japan Times that there was no way to have a writing career earlier on because her mother-in-law wouldn't have allowed her to spend so much time writing instead of doing wifely things. So although you didn't live with a Japanese mother-in-law, you were raising 4 kids, you were vice president of the Kodomo Kai, you were making your own umeboshi and rakyo. So you were very, very busy. Your husband was working full time. You're on this little mountain. So how did you give yourself permission and make time to write, especially the things that, like, novels and the memoir that weren't guaranteed to be published and make money?
Right. Yeah, so give myself permission. What can I tell you? I'm in charge of me and everything around me. I certainly run this household, and every place we've lived, I've always had my own room, or at least a space, where I could write. And it was something important for me to do. My husband understood that. My children certainly came to understand it, and it was never, I would say, was never a fight or a struggle to make that time. Of course, if I were a single woman with no children, who knows, I might have been a lot more productive. But I've been satisfied with, I don't know if I would call it my output, but what I've been able to do in my life in general, and also in writing.
Do you have any advice for women who might want to write but kind of feel that they need to do the housework first, or
Well, I
they
do
need
the
to have
housework
money?
too. I also do it, but I think, yeah, you just have to, yeah, know what's important for you, and set that time aside, and see to it that you get to it. Now, my children are adults; they're not living at home, but even now, I have just, a large house to take care of. But I said, yeah, it's not just set aside time. I, I sometimes refer to myself as a robot because I really, function on a schedule. I wake up every morning pretty much at the same time, get dressed, go to the pool, swim, come back, have breakfast, go, it's like, and my day just moves right on up until evening, where at 5 o'clock or 4:30, I back away from the computer. I won't have anything to do with it at all. I mean, no emails, no anything. Um, and just, yeah, I would say sticking to my own schedule, my own routine, just helps me to get things done. And I feel that's what women have to do, or anyone. But certainly, if you're a woman and have the care of young children, that's going to take up a big part of your day, and you really just have to carve out that time. I don't know if it means less time. I used to say, talking on the phone, but I don't think anyone talks on the phone anymore. I don't know if people are, doing Facebook or, what they do, but yeah, even if it's just, yeah, 2, 3, 4 hours, a good writing time where you can focus. I have a feeling you can get that time, somehow. When I wasn't, writing as much, when I wasn't publishing, it, and doing calligraphy, I always had to practice, and I practiced practically every day in the beginning, and getting that time where I could set up my brushes and sumi, and with young children running around, as if you have an accident with sumi, you ruin the whole house, or whatever. But I feel it can be done, and that we shouldn't give ourselves any excuses. I also would say get help. Absolutely get help if you can. I don't believe in the superwoman thing at all. She's a cartoon character, a comic book character. And I think if you can get help, you certainly ought to. If I were living in Tokyo or someplace, I assure you, I would have regular help. Here, it's really not so easy to get help.
So you were talking about your routine. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what kind of your writing routine was like while you were writing the memoir.
Sit down and get it done. Sit down and write. Yeah. Let's see. I can't say I started it while I was in Vienna, but as I said, I worked with a book project consultant, and one of the first things she did was tell me to read the writing of authors whose work had been well received. And I was just starting out on an extended trip in Europe, and I just took a lot of those books along with me, and read them. I also had to report on them. But then,
can you tell us some of the books?
The Glass Castle. I can't think of her name.
I think Jeanette Walls.
Jeanette Walls,
Yeah.
right? That was one. I think the Woman Warrior, Maxine Hong Kingston. I know I won't think of them now, just because you're asking me. Well, also the Tiger Mom book, which I thought, oh no, I don't. Yeah, I kind of heard about it, and I thought, oh, I don't want to read it, but I read it actually, and I liked it. And I had to, write reports on them. At another time, Suzanne, I could send you the list that she gave me. But I'd read a lot of memoirs. My favorite genre, memoir, autobiography, and biography. So I had that, I would say, to build on. And then, yeah, I just got started with it. And I'm not saying I had a good start, because one of the things, and I think this is the best reason to have an editor, a developmental editor, is that, well, both my book project consultant and the development editor said, this is wonderful. You've got a great story. The writing is wonderful, but it has no structure. And I thought, yeah, kind of whatever. It was like, I just patted myself on the back and said, well, they told me it was wonderful, and I'll just go with that. But then I realized you really must impose structure. You really must impose structure, or it will be a ramble. I mean, and it's especially, it wasn't like I was writing it when I was 20 years old or 30 years old. I've lived a long time. I'm an older person, And nor is it like I lived in one place and did one thing. I've had a pretty expansive life, so I really had to, I would say, yeah, wrap myself around my own story in a way to make it a story, and not just a bunch of vignettes of what I've done, where I went, or what people I've met, etc.
How many hours a day did you write, and like how many years did it take to finish the book?
Finish. I would say from once I started. I mean, as I said, I started years ago and then abandoned it. But once I really set out to do it, probably from start to finish. Now, as it's looking back, it must have been 2.5 years, probably something like that. Yeah, from start to finish. But and I would say I would spend at least 4 or 5 hours every day
Wow.
writing.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And sometimes I mean, I often think, oh, well, that's not a full working day, like 8 hours, but writing is so different. You really, it's like, it's almost like when you start seeing blood come through out of your forehead, you'll know you've really done something. But I mean, it's so intense. You have to be so focused, so concentrated, that I think it's almost like you don't even know what it's taking out of you until like you stop and go, oh wow, it's like, well, dinner time is that'll be a relief, eat something, drink something.
Okay. So did you like at what point did you decide that you were going to self-publish it? Did you shop it around, or did you kind of
I
think
didn't
from the
shop it
beginning?
around, but I would say pretty early on, I really got it that it would be no easy thing to get a publisher. I had one, or maybe it was two publishers interested. But when I realized what they wanted to do with my manuscript, I felt, yeah, we're not only not on the same page, we're not even in the same universe, and I don't want them to take over my manuscript. And with a publisher, I know they can decide, what chapters that they'll tell you to delete, or what should be your focus. And of course, they have their own publishing schedule. And I thought, I don't want to wait for my book to come out in 2024 or some kind of thing. Again, I'm like 20 years old, and I want to get this done. And I'm also, aware that being an independent author or a self-publisher, it does not carry the stigma that it once did. And even if it did, the fact that it can be done, and I didn't stint on it at all. I actually, put a lot of, resources. I paid a lot of money to have it done. I think professionally. I thought, yeah, it's like, I want to get this done. I'm not going to, wait around for a publisher. And I kind of saw what was out there and the responses I was getting from literary agents, and I wasn't happy with it. And also, one of the things that I did hear from agents and publishers was always, who's your target audience? They want to know that immediately. And of course, in my case, that was to mean women, Black women, mature women. And I mean, I don't know what else, but I really felt it was a box. And I thought, no, this is one thing where I really didn't, I felt like I'm not going to listen to the professionals on this. And I feel like I've been rewarded, because the people who've responded to my book are men and women of every ethnicity and nationality, of young people, mature people, people who live in Japan, people who've never even thought about Japan, or who've never traveled and never, left their hometowns. And that's the audience I want to reach.
So last I checked, your book is doing really well. Like on Amazon, you now have 149 reviews, 93% of which are 5-star. and there are a few 4
Yeah,
stars.
and of course, I'm always thinking about those other 7%.
No, the other 7% are like 4-star. That's really good.
Oh,
So
really? Yeah, but in the beginning, it was all 5 stars. And I thought, oh, that's great. And then the first time I saw a 4 star, it's like I couldn't even look. And it was my
yeah.
youngest daughter told me and said, Mama, it's just like not everybody's going to, love you and your book or whatever and give you 5 stars. So, yeah, I guess
It's
it's
doing
good.
really well. Yeah,
Yeah.
and people like it. I've heard raves about it. So do you what did you what do you think you were doing right with self-publishing, or like how do you have any clue as to why you've been so successful? And is there anything that you would do differently? I'm sure this was a learning process for you. So is there anything that you especially did correctly and anything that you might do differently next time?
Not really, actually. And it's not to say it's just perfect or whatever, but I think the fact that I took my time and I, really got professional advice that it's the book I want. It's like I'm absolutely satisfied with it. So I can't say there's something I would have done differently, really. Yeah, well, I mean, I can have been told, or I know if you have a publisher that they will, handle your promotion and, do it, but still they expect the author to do a lot of that, but not really having any experience in that. And it's like, and, trying to get the book reviewed and not even, I'm not saying it's like not looking for favorable reviews, but just, to get the book out there. I think that's an uphill climb, but there's nothing I can do about that. I will follow any lead, anyone who would like, to review it. I'm more than happy, or if they invite me for, for a talk, I'm more than happy to do it. But no, I can't say there's anything really that I would do differently.
Okay. And you do have like a bit of help from your children, right?
Yeah, I do. Well, first of all, my grandson designed my website, and my youngest daughter, who is a director at Netflix, and her husband, who has his own production team, they like, put the whole thing together. So yeah, there was definitely some help. I have another daughter who is a director at marketing at Nike, and so I mean they kind of get it. It's like what you've got to do. I Yeah, probably like most writers, I'm happy to hide out in my room and the house and my life, and don't want to push anything, but they pretty much made it clear, Mom, you've got to do this, like Facebook, for example. Like they had absolutely no experience with Facebook. And even now, I think I told you the other day, I'm very, very timid about it. I don't think I've posted anything yet that I didn't have my husband read first. I'm absolutely serious, because I think it's like, what are other people going to say or think, or it's okay if I do this, but maybe I, did it the other day, or I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm always second guessing with it.
But your husband has been posting about the book, so that's why we think he's so great. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, he put up something the other day, or I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, because it was #1, which I know it's a totally fickle thing, but yeah. Oh, he called me from the other room. He said, "Oh, Karen, book is #1," and I said, "Yeah." Again, it's I think it changes on an hourly basis. The first times I saw it, I didn't even like take a screenshot, because I didn't really get it. I thought this was just something Amazon does. No, really. And then it was my daughter who told me, no, well, your book being #1 is, means it's selling well, or, and that it's #1. That's a good thing, Mama.
It's doing well, and you won an award too.
Yeah. The awards are nice. Yeah. What can I say? It's not, expect or not expect. It's, if you get an award, it's absolutely the first awards of my life. So I'm very happy for that. I think more than anything, it sort of it confirms you've done something well that other people can appreciate, and that's what I appreciate. And I don't know if I can say here, but I will say that I've never been interested in selling the book. And my daughters, who has also been acting as my publicist, said, "Mommy, you can't say that." But that's really how, how I feel. That I really want people to read it. I'm very interested in people reading it. But how they come by it, if they borrow it from a friend or get it in a library, whatever. I'm not trying to make money from it. I'm not wealthy, but yeah, I own my house. I don't have any debt. My children are grown and gainfully employed. I have enough money to do what I want to do. So that's not what's important to me. Is all I can say. So I've never like gone after trying to make sales. And several people always ask me, it's like, how is the book selling? I couldn't tell you, and I get regular statements from Amazon and from Ingram or whatever. I put them in a folder. I really don't pay attention. And actually, my husband will tell me sometimes, "Oh, your money is it's coming in the bank," but he's joking. He'll say, "Oh, it's piling up." I assure you, it's not piling up.
I think it's a good attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, why don't you read a bit from your memoir?
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to. I chose a section that it's chapter 20 from my memoir, and it's about my beginning as a columnist. Let's see, I printed it out because it's easier than reading it in a book. I began writing for the Japan Times in 1979. The longtime and much-loved columnist Jean Pierce, who was also a friend, told me the paper would be starting a new column titled Living in Japan, and that readers would be invited to contribute essays about their experiences. Knowing I was a loyal reader and that I'd written essays, she urged me to contribute something. In those days, my husband Billy regularly borrowed a typewriter from a friend's office in town. Over the weekend, I'd type up anything I'd written and he'd return the portable Smith Corona on Monday. I sat down to write my essay for Living in Japan, which had a 500-word limit. And when I looked up, I had 2,000 words. I submitted it anyway. Totally unprofessional. I would not do that now. Fortunately for me, they liked it, asked for photographs, and published my essay, not for that new column, but as a Sunday feature article. I had no other purpose in writing that article than to tell people about the beautiful place where we live still, in Tenryu, Shizuoka Prefecture. A place that is a vista of bamboo stands, terraced rice paddies, and rolling tea bushes. Here, mountains meet the sky, outlining the foothills of the southern Japanese Alps. I wanted to tell readers about the people we were settled among, farmers who lived and died in the houses they built from trees cut from their own land. People whose simple lives were carried on in a quiet continuum with the seasons. I wanted people to know about my nearest neighbor, Oishi-san, who grew everything she ate and who on a rainy day when she wasn't in the fields could be found spinning straw for sandals and baskets. I thought readers might like to hear about the time a fox nibbled at a pumpkin pie I'd put outside to cool, and how when I told Oishi-san, she was more curious to know what I'd done with the kabochai she'd given me than the part about the fox. In that essay, I wrote that if you walked in the woods around our old farmhouse, you might be surprised by a bevy of quail, or perhaps one lone mushroom, shooting up from the dark forest floor, ivory white and 20 centimeters tall. Gyo Hani, then the managing editor of the paper, praised my essay and encouraged me to continue to write. I was grateful for the encouragement, and putting it on the back shelf of my mind, hoped I'd be able to write something else the Japan Times would print. At the time, my second daughter was not a year old, and she kept me busy running after her in the yard as she chased lizards and sat in mud puddles eating rocks, and when in the house, supplemented this diet by tearing out and eating the rice paper of the shoji screens. In short, she hardly contributed to a supportive environment for writing. I'd read the Japan Times from the first day we arrived in Japan. And in those first days, when there was not one word of Japanese that was intelligible, I found solace in being able to read, period. And I didn't just read the paper, I read every word. The paper was what I most looked forward to after dinner and after another day of being unable to use language to communicate. Doing the crossword puzzle was my dessert. In those early years, it was more than a newspaper to me. It was company. Sometime around the mid-'80s, the paper announced with regret that one of its regular columnists had died suddenly. I was sorry to hear the news. I knew the writer through her column, which I'd enjoyed and would miss reading. Putting aside all thoughts of being an opportunist, it occurred to me that newspapers must always be seeking to fill space. I'd noticed too that most of the columns had a Tokyo dateline. I didn't know Tokyo at all at the time and thought of it as a place to renew my passport at the American embassy. I knew I was living proof that not all foreigners living in Japan lived in Tokyo. Several years had passed, but Hani-san was supportive when I asked the editors to let me write a column with a Hamamatsu dateline. And I wrote the column, Hamamatsu Highlights, for about 7 years. I started writing the column I titled Crossing Cultures shortly after we bought land and built our current house in 1990. Having made that commitment, I realized there were few foreign families, I didn't know any, who were settled quite as firmly as we were. Deciding to stay in Japan after our first year of living and studying in a dojo, we'd simply thrown in our lot with the people of this country. As an American couple living and raising a family in rural Japan, we were a rarity. We had no Japanese family members, though I often wished we did. I think it must be the single most desirable element to live in Japan. As part of a Japanese family, our children would have grandparents as well as an extended family of aunts, uncles, cousins. Family would give us occasion to participate in Japan's many cultural rituals and help open some of the doors to this culture that influence many aspects of daily life. Having a Japanese family would give us a haven, a place we and our children knew we were always welcome. It would be our jika, a home we could always return to. I suggested to my editor at the Japan Times that readers might be interested to read about life in Japan from the perspective and experience of a foreign woman participating in society here at every level. Not especially enthusiastic, she responded dryly, "Let me see something." That something was my first Crossing Cultures column, published November 8th, 1990. Immediately, the column proved popular, and what a joy it was for me to share my life and experiences with such a large and receptive audience. I still keep the many letters of appreciation I received, and not least because these handwritten and piped letters are now relics. The Japan expert and writer, Donald Ritchie, who would become not just a good friend but a supporter, told me my column was the first thing he read on the days it appeared. And I will tell you all now something that's not in the book. And that is, often when I'd go to Tokyo, Donald would invite me to have lunch. And on one such occasion, he said, "Karen, so tell me, when is your book coming out?" Assuming the Japan Times publishing would publish a collection of the columns. And I told him that I had approached the publishing department, and they turned me down flat. They said, "No, we won't do that." And I just, thought, well, that's that. And Donald said, "You tell so-and-so," and he gave me the name of someone in the publishing department, "that I said I urge him to publish your book." I did just what Donald told me. And I can tell you that not a week passed before they got back to me with a publishing schedule for the book. And here's a copy of it. No longer in print. And it's kind of a, let's say, it's a almost a special element now because none can be found anywhere. In any case, men and women from all over Japan, as well as from Ireland, Austria, Ghana, Hawaii, Poland, and Sri Lanka, to name a few countries, wrote telling me that through my column and my eyes, they felt they were experiencing the real Japan. The real Japan for readers meant our inaka or country lifestyle. How lucky I was to have experienced the rustic life, they told me. Though I think few would have wanted to be as lucky as I'd been to build a fire to heat my bath, have no plumbing, and have to empty their own toilet. In the column, I didn't romanticize those aspects of our country life. By that time, I'd come to see them as deprivations. But deprivations notwithstanding, I noticed and observed everything and enjoyed immensely telling my stories of raising a family here and the children's school life, as well as my interactions in the neighborhood and community. I shared my sadness as I experienced the unrelenting depopulation of the countryside, a tragedy in so many ways for Japanese society. It hit me personally as it accompanied the deaths of my old neighbors, Oi-san, Arai-san, Otani-san, farm women who kept me supplied with green tea and shiitake. I wrote about what amused me, like the time another mother and I were practically prepared to show surgical scars we didn't have, all to get out of a school obligation. I found Japan was full of surprises and lessons, and I never ran out of things to write about. Now into my fourth decade, actually approaching the fifth decade, I continue to uncover new aspects of Japanese life and culture. This unending discovery remains one of the things I find so appealing about living here. To have a forum and outlet where I could openly express my ideas and feelings greatly enhanced my experiences of living in Japan. Sharing my thoughts with an appreciative audience was more than beneficial. It sustained me. I have often wondered and doubted if I would have remained in Japan as long as I have without it. That's my reading. Thank you. Thank you.
So this is the 40th year of SWET, I believe. So you've been living in Shizuoka since 1975, so over the whole life of SWET. And what kind of changes have you seen in regards to writing, editing, and publishing over the past 40 years? For example, you initially, sent your columns by A4 envelopes.
Oh boy, yeah, that was something. Well, because I mean, of course, having deadlines, and you could not, get right up to the deadline and expect your column to get in. You had to, type it out, and usually in carbon copy, and then go mail it. It wasn't even like you print it out. What am I saying? It was, it wasn't a print out. You actually had to, send the copy. And then after that, later, I remember faxing them. I never sent a copy by email. By the time I quit the Japan Times, or I would say a few months after I quit the Japan Times, they went online. But before that, they hadn't been.
Okay.
Anything else about changes? I'm not sure.
Whatever other thoughts you have about the 40 years, but we can open it up to other questions.
Okay.
So I have a question
Yeah.
that's related to what you were just saying about the 40 years. When I sort of asked Suzanne to mention that because I was thinking of more tone related or era related changes. Like in the 1980s and 90s, we were still very much learning about Japan, and everything was new and hard to get used to. Now we're much more mature about Japan, Japanese culture, and international culture. I really think we've come a long ways. And so when I read our writing and columns of the 1980s and 90s, I feel it would be different if we were writing them today. Do you feel that too, Karen?
It's Possible. I mean, it's hard to say since I stopped writing columns 20 years ago, and besides for the world changing, I've changed, but I've always written from a personal standpoint, and I don't think that would been much changed. And also, when I was writing, I never had to, write about any, I would say, particular thing or target anything so much. Before the Japan Times, I wrote for Chunichi Shimbun
Hmm.
some years before I started writing for them, and I remember my editor there. His name was Narita-san. Told me I could write about anything I wanted, absolutely anything I wanted, and I say this in the book too. The only thing he warned me, he said, don't write about the Yakuza. And it's like, I wouldn't even think about writing about the Yakuza. What would I say about them? I don't know anything about them.
So, Karen, so wonderful to hear all this. I feel like I've followed in your footsteps, literally, going from fledgling blogger to Japan Times columnist to self-published author to consultant hired to advise companies on issues like diversity. I share your distaste for that word, how it's come to be used too often, inclusivity and representation. So my question is, did you consult with Japanese companies as well? You mentioned several large Western companies, Nike and several others you mentioned, but you didn't mention any Japanese companies. And I was curious, if you did, how were you able to make contact with them? Because that's something I'm in the process of doing currently. I've consulted with a number of Japanese companies about these issues, and they're my primary target. Because I think most Western companies are kind of up to date on a lot of these issues, but the Japanese companies, they're kind of lagging behind in some cases. So if you were consulting with them as well, how did you make contact with them?
Well, I can tell you, I actually never sought out this work to begin with. I was approached in every instant, including from Citibank, HSBC, Shinsei Bank, et cetera, by people who were familiar with my column and thought that I had insights regarding culture. And that's
exactly
why
the same experience. Exactly.
Well, I was absolutely happy to do that. So and I have also worked with Japanese companies and Japanese executives. I've coached Japanese executives. I can't say, oh, do this, do that. This is not career advice or whatever. But I found that being successful in one company would lead to a connection with others. I would be introduced to a CEO or someone, the head of HR, and they might ask for a proposal, accepted, the one I submitted and do it. But I also did work with Japanese companies, yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
And great presentation. So great to hear your voice. It's the first time I've heard this.
Thank you.
I have a question, if that's okay. I guess it's okay. Nobody's saying no. Okay. One thing is I would like to say thank you for doing those cultural talks with companies, because in the 80s, I came and worked at Mitsubishi for 2 or 3 years, the first foreigner to work this is in Osaka. But to be very honest, I kind of made a point of not making waves, and I wanted to be as good as serving tea as the other women in the office, and cleaning as well as they did, and bowing as well as they did. And I wanted to know all about them and understand them. But what I did was pave the wrong path for any other women coming into Mitsubishi, to be honest. I made the wrong impression about what women could do in the company. But that's not my question. My question is, how did you come up with your title? Because you have done about 1 million things and been about 1 million places. How did you bring it down to this one place? I know you love the place where you live, but
the view from Breast Pocket Mountain.
Breast Pocket Mountain, yeah.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, giving a title to the book was probably the hardest part of writing the book. I didn't come up on it immediately, and my whole family was involved with the process, and my 4 children and their 4 spouses, and we were passing emails back and forth, and you checked if you like this one, you didn't, or that, and we had some other possibilities, but I actually came up with this, which is surprising because I'm not good at naming things. but it just hit me, and I felt, yeah, this 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 encompassed what, my story, and with the photograph, with the cover as it was, I felt this is maybe where I became, most reflective. I can't say more than that, but and of course it's unique. There will not be another view from Press Point Mountain. Yeah. So
Very true, very true.
yeah, yeah, that's all I can say.
Interesting. Well,
I had another question about naming. Like, how did you come up with the name Sen Yume for your press?
That was another thing. I was like, that's the thing. When you have a lot of children, you you can always get them involved, and we batted around a lot of names, and yeah, I like this one. And the character is one that I wrote, and it's Dream, and written in social, and it can be, of course, translated as 1,000 dreams, but that wasn't the idea that it should be. But a word that has meaning, but doesn't have to have a meaning, can just be a name. And even if it's people say Senyum, I wouldn't mind. Yeah, I just that's the one I thought worked. And after, again, batting around a number of names and titles, I mean, not titles, the title was definitely a much longer process than the name of the imprint.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Hello there, Karen.
Hello, Jim Adams.
Yes, I'm a fellow rural Shizuoka resident, except I'm on the other side. I'm over in Izu.
Oh, Izu. Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Love it there, of course.
So I wanted to ask you, I married a Japanese woman a long time ago, and her family there's nobody there who speaks English. So I was, how do I want to say, immersed in Japanese culture, probably not voluntarily, but by necessity.
Right.
And as a result, have never had a lot of interaction with other foreigners while I've been in Japan. But you seem to, and so as a result, I feel strange. I mean, it's nice to be able to hear people speaking English. It's nice to be able to speak English. And you, on the other hand, seem to have a pretty good balance of daily life in Japan and interaction with the outside world. So what I'm trying to see if you could comment on that, I'm sure you don't intentionally balance it, but how do you think about that the movement between a very rural Japanese, all Japanese life, and your communication and maybe the importance of each?
Right. Probably I would say I don't think about it. Don't think about it anymore. I now accept that this is my life. It's my choice. No one's forcing me to live where I do.
Yeah.
But my world is totally Japanese. All of my neighbors are Japanese, and I say this in the book. The only time I speak English is when I'm speaking with my husband, and yeah, it's no longer a problem. And I don't know if you've read the book, but I do write in the book of how isolated I was, and I didn't have people to talk with. But and even now, I live in a danchi. I don't live as far out in the country as remotely but I don't see people on a regular basis. I consider the chance to say Ohio to a neighbor an opportunity. That's kind of like a big thing. But I mentioned, I think in the beginning, I go to a pool every morning, and there are a group of, everyone there is retired. That's why they can be there in the morning, and they're not at a job. So, there's a chance to chat with people there. But I mean, there are no foreigners. There are no foreigners anywhere near where I live. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi. I'm Melissa. I live in Kyoto, and really, hi, enjoyed your talk a lot. And I ordered the book as we were on, so you'll have another sale.
Great.
really looking forward to reading it. I'm just curious about like negotiating the written Japanese language, how that has been for you over the years. I mean, I work in a Japanese sphere as well, and I have to do, I mean, everything that comes to me is written in Japanese, and I have to write everything in response in Japanese. Have you been able to orchestrate your professional life so that you just deal with things in English in the written world, or like when you write a proposal can you write that in English, or how has that worked for you over the years?
When I was writing proposals, and I'm not doing that now, I always submitted them in English. Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't write in Japanese as any part of my daily life. And although I do calligraphy, and I'm very interested in the piece behind you, and you can see these ones behind me are some of my work. I can write Chinese and, and very old scripts, but if I had to write a letter, that would be a problem. I can tell you right now, I don't do that. Yeah. It's not part of my daily life. Yeah.
So like for just logistical things in your household, then does your husband do that, or do you have people that help you? Or
yeah, I mean, if we have to fill out a form or something like that, we can do that, and I can do that. But what I'm saying is that I don't write in Japanese to communicate.
Right.
At all. No.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
So Jean has a good question.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Sure.
Karen, I just wanted to thank you and congratulate you for your book. As I've told friends, I just couldn't put it down.
Oh, thank you.
And Richard Sadowski is another friend who found it quite compelling. If I may say, among the many joys of reading it was you seem to almost embrace change and impermanence with the equanimity of a Buddhist priest, with the practicality of a mother.
Oh.
But the question that I had, not many of you may know that Suzanne herself wrote a column for ANA's in-flight magazine Wingspan called Double Take. And another question occurred to me as I was forming this in my mind. It was about bicultural life in Japan. It began as when in Japan, but then soon shifted to what bicultural life is like. And the idea for the column came to me when I was attending a book launch of Broken Bridge by Suzanne. Oh, was it? Was it there? Forgive me. That's right. And I had the idea to have her and Lisa Lowitz and Holly Thompson share the responsibilities so they wouldn't be burdened with it. First question is, how did each of you choose your topic for what to write about in the column? But perhaps more importantly, among the wonderful topics that Suzanne wrote about was deaf culture, and she was quite forthright about it, as she was about other aspects of being a mother and a writer in Japan. On our side, I cannot say who, but there was a bit of censorship that we had to deal with, Suzanne may remember, which I tried to champion as best I could what she had written, and it had gotten filtered. So
Jean, can you tilt your camera up a little bit? We can't see your eyes.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks, Richard. First question is, how did you each choose your topics? And second, Karen, when you were writing your columns, did you encounter any censorship? And if so, how did you deal with it? And I'd like to hear from Suzanne how she dealt patiently or impatiently with such filters. That's it.
All right, so I'll go first. So as Jean suggested, I sometimes try to push the envelope a bit about, I knew like writing for Wingspan, you weren't supposed to write about illness or anything negative because people who are flying 30,000 miles above the earth don't want to worry about such things. But as the mother of a daughter with disabilities, I don't think that having a disability is a negative thing. And I was trying to normalize it. So I would try to work in stories about my daughter, doing ordinary things like going to karaoke or, using sign language. I wrote about her several times in various ways.
If I may briefly interrupt, your critique of deaf signing in Japan was marvelous. Did it get through pretty much unfiltered as is? I don't
I think you
quite
did.
recall.
Yeah. So I tried to find ways to write about disability and things that weren't really written much about in Japanese media. But also, we thought about seasonal topics and
Right.
as a writer, like I was always open to, whenever something sort of interesting happened, I'd be like, oh, that's a story idea, so I had a stash of those ideas.
Great. How about you, Karen? How did you choose your topics, and did you find your writing filtered or censored by any of the newspapers?
Never ever censored or filtered, ever. Never ever.
Right.
And usually, yeah, I always had a sort of like a running list. Sometimes I'd written it down, but just in my head of something that I wanted to write about, something I wanted to share with readers. It could be something that happened recently, or was touched off by a memory. But yeah, there was always something. But I mean, when you're writing about your life and the lives of your 4 children, not their personal lives or whatever, there's always something. Absolutely always something. And sometimes I did, well, I guess you would say, topical commentary. And by the way, I will say here that I quit the Japan Times, I said, on the day, I think, after Columbine, because I would normally have written something about it, and I just realized I don't want to. I just absolutely don't want to. And in general, I just felt I've done this enough. I'm through. Yeah. And I mean, it wasn't even like it was a bad thing, but it was time to move on for me.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you, Gene.
So that was a great segue for the question I want to ask. So speaking of moving on, I wanted to ask you, Karen, what's next? What's on the horizon? What are you working on?
People started asking me that right away after I finished the memoir, and I thought the almost cute answer is, writers don't talk about what they write. You write and you produce something. But now I can tell you, I'm finishing a novel, and I have another project, and I'm wondering, should I finish this novel, which I put on the side for a very long time, or do this other thing, which in a way attracts me more. So that's about all I can say. It's finishing a novel, and actually I'm glad to be doing it now, and it's so good to do it after not having published my first novel, because it is not in any way autobiographical. And yeah, I'm having, I would say, fun with it, because these people I've created, but I'm discovering at the same time. It's quite enjoyable.
Thank you.
I mean, that's in writing. I mean, you're talking about in general life, traveling and things like that. Yeah, no, which, like everybody else, I can't go anywhere. What we had planned, next would be Portugal, Greece, and Israel. And now I feel like if I can go to the next town and continue to go to the pools, down the street, down the road, that I have to be satisfied with that for the time being.
Thank you. Suzanne has put in a follow on to that. She says, is the novel related to Japan? And then we'll go to those who have their hands up.
Yes, it is. The main character is, well, I'm not going to say anymore.
Great, thank you. We will wait. All right.
Hi.
I'm intrigued by all the books in your background. Are you, well, it's a weird question, but what do you read most, or who are your favorite authors?
I read almost exclusively nonfiction, and that happened after I finished my first novel. I don't know, in a way I felt like I just threw up my hands with fiction, but now I feel like I'm coming back to it. But I read a lot of nonfiction, a lot of, I guess you would say, social. I read like The Joy of Physics, that kind of thing. I would say, let's see, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins are some of my favorite writers. Ayaan Hirsi Ali is also a favorite. And I often return to Bertrand Russell. I absolutely love Bertrand Russell, and it's almost that like I'm reading him constantly.
Okay, this is going to be a bit of a touchy subject, but I'm curious because as writers, we write based from our experience. I grew up in the South in the era of Jim Crow and segregation. Though I was on the other side, so to speak. In my early years, my father was military, so the military is illegal segregation. So it was quite surprising for me to turn up in Louisiana and to see all these things happening. But when I came to Japan, it was kind of interesting, not as bad as it was for African Americans in the United States. The shoe was on the other foot, so to speak. People, sit down, they get up and leave, or you come to a restaurant and somebody will suddenly say, we're closed or something. I haven't experienced it that much, but I'm just curious, your experience in Japan, like I think you've lived most of your time in the rural areas, and I spent most of my time in the city. Have you had that kind of experience?
Not really so much. I mean, of course, it would be unusual if in 46 years of living here that I hadn't ever experienced something negative, related to the color of my skin. But it's been so, I would say, insignificant, and so, I would say, unimportant to my story and my overall experience that these things barely, they barely resound with me. It's hard to even, say anything about it. I'm different. I know I'm different. I look different. There's no place I go. If you could see where I live, you'll know that if I go to the supermarket or the dentist or the doctor or the post office, I'm not going to bump into anyone who looks like me ever. It doesn't happen. It really doesn't happen. And if I weren't comfortable with that, I would have lost my mind a long time ago. So, but yeah, I don't tend to be disturbed by that kind of thing. And for example, Suzanne mentioned that, I love hula. I do hula. I have a wonderful hula class. It goes without saying, I'm the only foreign woman in the group. Goes without saying, I'm the only one with this color skin. But I wonder if anyone notices that I'm also the tallest woman in my group. Everyone is, a woman. We're all probably, in the same age range. And they're of an earlier time when Japanese women were shorter. So as far as I'm concerned, is it important that I'm tall, or is it important that I have dark skin? I mean, what of these things matter? I don't find them particularly important, and most of the people that I come to know don't seem to place that much significance on it.
I think maybe part of the reason is I also do some work, and I often run across extreme right-wingers or groups in the political field. And then I just kind of go, whoa, they are there.
Yeah,
so
that's too bad.
Yeah, I just kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, there are.
All right, thank you.
Takes all types. Okay, thank you, Eric.
The part one was excellent. What you shared with us was quite. I've heard you speak before, and been with you in a few other events, but what you said today was completely different. Is not really the right word, but it was. It was just very enlightening, and of course, there's commonalities between all of us, I'm sure, doing many things. A couple of phrases that you said that I wrote down in my memo. Cross-cultural competence. I liked that. I'm not sure if you said it or Suzanne said it, but referring to you, cross-cultural competence. I like that expression. And the other one was not interested in selling your book. That's not why you did it. And from someone who has published a book with us, very, 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 very small publisher, and where nothing really sells except what through my own power. But it's the same thing. I really want people to read it. I mean, I give it away to people when I can, and that's not how
I mean, you can't always.
You can't always, but I mean, when I can, I give it away, and when I can sell it at cost or make some profit, then that's good. But anyway, I just wanted to share that. But one thing, I had one question. You talk about Facebook and how you're not very good at it. And I remember seeing one post that you made on Facebook, and it was an English reading group in Chiba. And they were all, it was like a kinen shashin, and they all were standing there, sitting at the table or standing in some room, holding your book up. And they sent you this photo or something. So I wonder if that was something that you organized or they contacted
No,
you?
absolutely
Or...
not. No, absolutely not. No, they got in touch with me, and I thought it was so wonderful. One, that they, contacted me and said that they were reading the book, and I thanked them, and I don't know if it was in the original email or the second one, but they sent me that photograph. Oh, and I just loved it. One, because they look like my neighbors, and none of my neighbors are reading my book. Of course, they don't even know I've written a book. But I just loved it, and and I asked for their permission if I, could put it up, and that they were absolutely thrilled that I would, just said, oh, you'll put it on your Facebook page, and I was very happy to do that, and I sent them each a thank you note.
That's very nice. I just wondered if that was something that you had arranged yourself.
No. I'm not. One, I'm not so calculating, but two, I'm not so smart, and it's like, and I don't really have that promotional sense. There's probably more I could do, but if anything, I tend to hold back, and it's just because it's not something familiar to me. I mean, I'm not shy or anything like that, or even modest, really. But I don't know so much, about promotion. So.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Ed, thanks.
Great talk.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I appreciate it.
I'll just read what I wrote. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Other than the death of your dear neighbors, what changes have you noticed in deep country living, having lived 35 years in the mountains of Nagano and written about traditional crafts and lifestyles? And you might have read my column in Japan.
I was about to say, Patricia Massey, I certainly know who
Thank
you
you.
are. Yeah, and I think we're meeting for the first time.
Yeah, we should have met earlier. I really haven't yet. Anyway, I feel both delighted to have certain comforts now that were not possible formerly, and also distressed that certain customs are disappearing. And I wonder if you have this kind of ambivalent feeling too.
I wouldn't say it's so ambivalent, as I am very happy to be living in a custom-built house and no longer building a fire from my bath. Pushing a button.
Yeah, right.
But I do lament the passing, the raising of houses.
Yeah.
And you realize Japan you knew was gone. For all time. But worse than that is to see places where it was all bamboo are now solar farms, that kind of thing. That it's nightmarish. It's just soul crushing. I feel. So that's really too bad. But I was talking with one of my old neighbors at Breastpocket Mountain at Futokoroyama, and she was telling, she was so excited that they had sold, off a big piece of land where they'd had tea for a solar farm.
Yeah.
They put it and I almost hope she didn't detect. I was like almost ready to burst into tears. But she was so happy. So happy because it's a source of income, the farmers. So you have to, I guess, also be practical and think, this is how, people, make a living. They have different lives, and you don't get to dictate how other people live or what's going, even happening with the land around you, which I'm sorry to say, I would certainly never permit it if I own, more land than we do.
Mm-hmm. I feel the same way. I wish I could own all of the city. I would be a great landlord.
Are you in Matsumoto or where?
No, Komoro. So it's nothing like where you are, right? Tenyu. It has a beautiful big supermarket. I mean, one of the big things one of the things that really surprised me when I moved there 40 years ago was they had a supermarket where I could get things that were not possible to get even in Kamakura.
Oh, wow.
From abroad. Amazing. But otherwise, being up in the 1,000 meters, we had neighbors who were making, growing their own rice and so forth.
Right,
all of that is gone. They don't grow their own rice. We don't hear the frogs anymore. We don't see the moon in the rice paddy anymore.
Some things have gone.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, welcome to the 21st century.
Exactly.
But
Well,
we can
thank
do
you so
this.
much.
We can do this. We can Zoom.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So we won't put down the 21st century all together wholesale. Yeah, there are some good things.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to reading your book.
Oh,
Thank
I
you
hope
for
do
writing
read
it.
it. Oh, thank you. I hope you will read it.
Okay.
So Skylar's got a question in the chat, and this may be what you had your hand up to ask about life and career advice for young entrepreneurs. Well, we've just been talking about solar panels. Skylar, do you want to elaborate any on that, or Karen, do you want to go with it?
Advice
You
for
too.
young entrepreneurs? Oh, what would I ever know? I mean, really, I'm not going to say follow your dream. I mean, I think, yeah, it would, for me, it'd have to be more specific, but even, yeah, so I mean, I couldn't tell you how to break into, writing, for newspapers or anything really. Don't really know that I have anything to contribute.
Probably your life itself is a model.
This is like do what you want to do and see how things end up. It's like, hope for the
And
best.
also, one of the other things in the chat is from Mary Wanjohi, who says earlier when you were talking, what a great mindset. And your mindset is your biggest asset, it seems to me. You are listening to people and taking yourself as you are and not dividing up things. And that's what we need to do, right?
Well, we need to do a lot in this life.
Yeah.
I just feel it works for me. I feel, yeah, that how I've been able to interact in the world has served me, and I guess, and if it didn't, I would be doing something else. Yeah.
Do you think that mindset is something that your father in particular planted in you, or something that you yourself created over the varied course of your experiences? Right. Yeah.
Someone else asked me that actually, and the same thing is like, was it your father? Because he was obviously probably the most formative influence in my life, but my father never traveled, absolutely never traveled. So he didn't, give me the gift of, wandering. But perhaps I would say the sensibility or the feeling, the awareness that it'll work out, that you'll be able to work out, that there are problems and things may be difficult, but you can overcome them. You're not held down by any. And of course, I mean, he never said anything like that, but I would say that's my general feeling, just about everything in general.
Yeah, that's excellent. Very basic.
I just finished reading your book about, a few days ago. I really appreciate it. And what I especially could relate to is, in a way, your childhood, in the sense that you grew up without a mother, which is also my own story. It's similar to that. Plus the fact when you went all over Europe and the way you came to Japan. These parts are for me, of your memoirs, very enriching, and at the same time, they made me remember my own experience and reflect upon those. Now, when it comes to Japan, I've been living here for a long time, like 40 years, except that at some point I became very tired of living in Japan. And I decided that I came here when I was way too young. And although I had seen the world in a little bit similar way to yours, still I felt like claustrophobic. So I left Japan, but I didn't go home. Basically, I do not feel I belong to anywhere at this point, because I've been away from my own country since childhood, and it was a very complicated experience. And then I lived for short periods, but I did live and participate, let's say, in societies such as I lived in Hawaii, I lived in London, I lived in New York. And my last 10 years, I spent in the Middle East, which was really a very interesting experience to me and sort of completed my view or my feeling, or I don't know how to say it, but for West Asia and let's say East Asia, like it's like I felt I rounded up the whole thing. But somehow my question is now, I mean, that's why I really appreciate your international experiences and your, let's say, countryside Japan. I visit countryside Japan, but it's a place that I personally could have never settled in. So I always try to be in cities, like in the middle of the city, let's say, so in Tokyo. But when it comes to, I did write a lot of articles for, I don't know if any of you remembers, PHP Intersect, and then there was.
I do remember.
All right.
So yeah.
Yeah. Then also I had a column in the Mainichi Daily, which was called Monday Arts, where I introduced artists from Latin America. I mean, everybody from the cultural world, because originally that's where I come from. And then I have contributed pieces here and there, and in my pieces have been published like in Arabic or in Japanese. I used to work as a freelancer for many of the magazine house magazines and stuff like that, and also for some Arab publications. Now, the funny thing is when it comes to my memories, I don't even know how or in what language to start. Like, yeah, and at some points I want to do it in Spanish, but then again, I haven't been in a Spanish-speaking country for many years. And I self-taught myself English when I first went to the States because I knew only hello and thank you at that time. So I also feel, I mean, I do write in English, obviously, but it takes me ages because of, I really have to be very careful and think about every phrase. However, I enjoy doing it. So when it comes to memories, I start my draft in English and then it jumps down to Spanish. And then I sometimes feel like intersecting a few words in Japanese. And it's really it makes me crazy. So I finish by pushing everything aside. Like I get really confused. So when you mentioned that you had editors that help you, I at that point, my Zoom was really, the sound was not good, so I couldn't catch it. But you mentioned like 2 or 3 types of editors. So I was wondering, maybe that's what I need, but somebody who can really understand my sort of life experience.
Right. I could repeat it. I had a developmental editor, a copy editor, and proofreader, and a book formatter. But one thing I would say, Nora, because you seem to have quite a lot of questions and concern around memoir and the memoir process, I'd be willing to communicate with you. You can write, look at my website, get my email address, and I'll respond to you if you want to, have a communication.
Oh, thank you. That's really very, very kind of you. And surely I like to communicate. Maybe you can help me in a way go through, not to feel so discouraged by all these, I don't know what they are, blocks related to dispersion, I suppose.
Right. Well, let's, between you and I, as I say, I open my email to you, and feel free to communicate with me, and if I can help or encourage you in some way, I'll be happy to.
Well, thank you. That's really a gift I'm getting now from you. Thank you so much. So I'll do that at some point.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you.
I wanted to go back to the cross-cultural coaching. I didn't notice that much in the book, and I was wondering, like, if you can give us an anecdote or maybe words of wisdom or realizations that you offered to the companies that you were coaching.
Right. Well, I didn't write about that in the book, and I don't write about any of my experience of working in the corporate world in the book. I felt that it wasn't germane to my story. But yeah, I would have to actually show you some of the programs and seminars that I designed and developed. But generally speaking, I would say I took a very practical approach, as I tend to do with everything, in trying to help people become more cross-culturally competent. And sometimes I've found that, it would become too intellectual or too academic, or people had these ideas, or they read this or they read that, and had removed themselves really from the very basic experience of different people. And again, the difference in meaning, using the word diversity, coming together, sharing, learning, living together, developing relationships. And I can't say at this moment some of the ways I broke it down, but I would just kind of take it down to it's really very almost bones, so people would not be flummoxed by the idea of crossing cultures. It's not that I'm just saying it's not that big a thing. It is a big thing, in fact, but it's surmountable. It's we're all capable of doing it. Was my approach.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, it sounds like it's more personal than intellectual.
Absolutely, it was absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Karen. Thanks. It's been a great talk.
Hi.
I always enjoy hearing you talk. One thing, when I really liked the book, and you talked about your children and how I think you said at one point it wasn't always guaranteed that they would be fluent English native speakers. And as somebody raising my own children to be bilingual, I was quite interested in that. And I thought you quite deliberately stayed away from that. I don't know if maybe the children are writing their own books, or I just felt there was a whole other book there. But I wonder if you could talk about, one, bringing them up to be bilingual Japanese and English, and whether you consciously did make that effort. And two, what about the identity negotiation as growing up as non-Japanese children or American children, or however you want to phrase it, in Japan?
Right. Okay. Yeah. I wanted them to be bilingual, but we weren't particularly smart about it. And I do write about that somewhat in the book, because it's said, or the knowledge is, or the experience is, that if you want your children to be bilingual, that you must insist that they speak your language. Always, absolutely always. You can't sometimes let them speak to you in Japanese or German or whatever the language will be. And we didn't do that with our second daughter, she's the first of our 4 children who was born in Japan. She only spoke to us in Japanese, and I spoke to her in English, also consistently. But she didn't respond in English. She understood me, and I understood her. But if you really want them bilingual, you've got to stay with one. And I would say should have stayed with English. And again, in our case, since we were so different, we couldn't have been more different in our rural neighborhood, that we didn't want to put any pressure on her. It's like, oh, you've got to speak English. It's like maybe her friends might hear her speaking English, and that might become a problem in the schoolyard, or you don't know what. So we just kind of let it go. But we did make a point of sending them to boarding school so they would learn English. And now they're all, of course, bilingual. And our son is also trilingual. He speaks Spanish, and our second daughter speaks some Chinese. Right. But it's, you've really got to focus on it. And that second daughter, by the way, her husband is from Vienna. So she speaks to her children in Japanese, because that's her first language, really. He speaks to them in German. And when he's with us, when the children are with us, we speak in English. Yeah. And since they're born, they handle 3 languages.
Yeah. Okay. I love hearing stories like that. Thank you.
Yeah. No, it can be done. Yeah. It can be done, but it takes some effort on I think the parents' part. Yeah.
Well, I have lots of follow-up questions, but I don't want to cut into other people's time, so you can expect a quite long email from me soon.
Okay, yeah, feel free. It's like I'd be happy to exchange email with you.
Okay, thanks, Karen.
Sure. And I love that photo, by the way. I know that photo.
Oh yeah, very famous one, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Karen, so much. I only started to read the book a few days ago, but from the first moment I started to read it, it was I couldn't put it down. It's like 5.5 chapters gone, and it's already 1:01 in the morning. So, so that kind of thing. And I did. You and Suzanne just mentioned hyphenation in your talk, and I wanted to just ask you a detail. I mean, the content is wonderful, but the rhythms of the language are just absolutely great. Mm-hmm. So I want to actually read just 2 sentences, if it's okay, from your book, and ask you about the question about, whether it's, you wanted to do things your way and whatever. I want to hear your answer. So this is two sentences about Vermont. It's a little bit out of context, but it goes like this. I just put it in the chat. Before Vermont, and with the exception of the short time I lived in San Francisco, I'd never lived anywhere in the United States other than New York City. Health and environment conscious, crime-free, neighborly. Vermont was a good place to live. Mm-hmm. So in that second sentence, health and environment conscious, and crime-free. No hyphens there. So that's quite, it stood out to me, kind of unusual. Tell me what your feeling is.
You'll have to speak to my copy editor.
Oh yeah.
If it's a mistake, she'll take the flack or whatever. I no doubt that's how I wrote it. But if she left it like that, I guess no doubt she felt it was acceptable.
Okay.
Yeah. That's all I can tell you. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. No, but I love the book, and everybody should read it. And I'm gonna recommend it to my mom, who also went to George Washington High School in New York about almost 10
here.
Yeah, almost 10 years before you. But yeah, and I grew up in Rockland and came to Japan when I was 20. I didn't have the experience that you had with like living in Denmark and Scandinavia. And anyway, fascinating, and thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to your novel.
Please do. It might help me to. Well, I will finish it, but we'll see. Thank you.
All right, so let's formally conclude our meeting, and I'd like to ask everyone to join me in giving a big thanks to both Suzanne and Karen for their time and their insights today.
Thank you.